They say blood is thicker than water, but for my mother, it was just accounting fraud. On my 29th birthday, instead of a card, she sent me a bill totaling $499,000 labeled Cost of Raising a Failure. She copied 50 relatives. Expecting me to break, big mistake, I am a forensic auditor, and I do not argue with words. I argue with evidence. Tonight, I did not bring a check. I brought handcuffs. My name is Genevieve Alcott, and I live my life in the margins of a spreadsheet. Most people look at a balance sheet and see profit and loss. I see the fingerprints of human sin. I see the greed in an inflated expense report, the fear in a hidden offshore transaction, and the desperate stupidity of a man trying to buy a second life with company funds. I am 29 years old, and I work for Sterling and Oakhaven, a firm that does not technically exist on any public directory in Chicago. We are the people you call when you do not want the police involved yet, but you want to know exactly who stole your money and how to destroy them legally. My office is a glass box overlooking the Chicago River, which today looked like a sheet of hammered gray steel, matching the color of my suit and, frankly, the color of my soul. I have spent the last 7 years curating a life of aggressive minimalism. My apartment in the Loop is a study in white lacquer and chrome. I own 4 suits, all tailored to a millimeter of my frame. I have 1 set of high thread count sheets, a capsule wardrobe, and a refrigerator that usually contains nothing but sparkling water and lemons. I do not have clutter. I do not have sentimental trinkets. And until this morning, I thought I did not have a family. It was 10 in the morning on a Monday. I was sitting in a conference room with 3 junior auditors who were sweating through their shirts because they had missed a rounding error of 0.02% in a construction audit. I was about to dissect their incompetence when my phone, placed face down on the marble table, vibrated once. It was a priority notification, a personal email. I never get personal emails during work hours. I flipped the phone over. The sender name glared at me from the screen. Rosalind Alcott. The subject line was in all capital letters. Invoice for services rendered, 1997 to 2025. I signaled for the junior auditors to pause. With a swipe of my thumb, I opened the email. What I saw was not a letter. It was a PDF attachment styled like a corporate invoice, complete with the Alcott family crest, a lion rampant holding a sword. At the top right corner, the Bill To section had my full legal name, Genevieve Marie Alcott. The From section listed my mother, Rosalind. I scrolled down to the total at the bottom. The number was bolded and underlined in red, $499,000. I did not blink. I did not gasp. In my line of work, you learn that the bigger the number, the bigger the lie. I looked at the line items. They were a masterclass in petty malice. Item 1. Repair costs for the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. Dated June 4th, 2013. Cost, $12,000. I remembered that day. I was 16. I had not even been in the car. My sister, Beatrice, had taken it for a joyride while high on something she claimed was prescription cough syrup, and she had backed it into a stone fountain. I took the blame because Rosalind told me that if Beatrice got a record, it would ruin her debutante season. I took the fall. Now, I was getting the bill. Item 2. Emotional distress and maternal anxiety, compounded annually at 5% interest. Total, $150,000. I almost laughed. Rosalind charging for anxiety was like a shark charging for swimming lessons. Item 3. Wasted educational investment, $80,000. This referred to the private high school tuition she paid before she pulled me out and sent me to a boarding school that was essentially a holding cell for unwanted children. Item 4. Room and board, calculated at market rental rates for a luxury suite, $200,000. The list went on. It was a catalog of every moment I had breathed air in the Alcott household, monetized and weaponized, but the true venom was not in the attachment, it was in the CC field. She had copied the entire board of directors of the Alcott Group. She had copied 50 members of our extended family, including cousins I had not seen since I was 12. She had even copied the family attorney and the head of the local country club. This was not a request for payment. This was a public execution. She wanted me to be humiliated. She wanted the world to see Genevieve Alcott as a leech, a failure who cost her mother $500,000 just to exist. She wanted me to open this email, panic, and crumble. She thought I was still the teenager who cried when she locked me in the attic for forgetting to curtsy properly. She had forgotten who I became when I left that house. I looked up at the junior auditors. "Get out," I said softly. They scrambled for the door, leaving their laptops behind. Once the room was empty, I stood up and walked to the window. The city of Chicago sprawled out below me, a grid of logic and concrete. I took a deep breath. I did not feel shame. I did not feel the stinging heat of embarrassment that Rosalind had intended. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp click in the back of my mind. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut, but not on me. I walked back to my laptop and plugged in my security key. I navigated through 3 layers of firewalls until I reached a hidden partition on my hard drive. There was a single folder there, encrypted with a 24-character password. The folder was named Project Nemesis. I had created this folder 5 years ago, the day I passed my certified fraud examiner exam. Every time I found a discrepancy in the family news, every time I saw a photo of Beatrice wearing a diamond necklace that shouldn't have been affordable on the family's declared income, every time I found a shell company linked to my father's name in the public records, I saved it here. I had been building a case, not out of malice, but out of habit. It is what I do. I collect ghosts. I clicked open the file. It was massive. Gigabytes of scanned documents, forensic timelines, and bank statements I had legally obtained through public domain leaks. Rosalind wanted to talk about debt? Fine. We would talk about debt, but we would use my accounting standards, not hers. I thought of Beatrice, my sister, the golden child. Currently, she was the face of the Alcott Foundation, a charity that supposedly funded arts programs for underprivileged youth. Her Instagram feed was a curated gallery of gala dinners, ribbon cuttings, and selfies with minor celebrities. She was perfect. She was beautiful. She was also a financial black hole. I knew for a fact that the administrative costs of the foundation were hovering around 80%. Most of it funneled into consulting fees paid to companies registered in Delaware that had no employees. Beatrice didn't have a job. She had a lifestyle funded by tax-exempt donations. And Rosalind was the architect. Then there was my father, Arthur. I looked at the email again. His name was there, buried in the CC list. Arthur Alcott, the CEO on paper, but a ghost in his own home. He hadn't written this. He probably hadn't even seen it yet. He was likely on the golf course or hiding in his study with a glass of scotch, pretending he was the master of his domain. His silence was his signature. He had watched Rosalind tear me down for years and had never raised a hand to stop it, only offering me sad smiles and whispered apologies that vanished the moment Rosalind entered the room. He was a co-conspirator by way of cowardice. I picked up my phone again and dialed a number I had memorized but rarely used. It rang 4 times. "Alcott residence," a stiff voice answered. It was the house manager. "Put me through to Hattie," I said. "I am afraid Mrs. Hattie Alcott is resting, and tell her it is Genevieve. Tell her I have the bill." There was a pause, then a click, and then the sound of breathing that sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "Genevieve." The voice was frail but sharp as a razor wire. My grandmother, the matriarch, the only person in that God-forsaken family who understood the language of power. "Grandmother," I said, keeping my voice level. "I assume you received the email Rosalind sent this morning." "I did," Hattie replied. Her voice crackled with static. She was using the old landline in the East Wing. "It was distasteful, even for her." "I am coming to the anniversary gala on Saturday," I said. "You were not invited. Genevieve, I saw the guest list. Your name was omitted." "I know, but I'm coming anyway. I have an invoice to settle." There was a long silence on the other end. I could picture Hattie sitting in her high-backed velvet chair, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun, her eyes scanning the room for spies. She had built the Alcott empire alongside my grandfather. She knew where the bodies were buried because she had held the shovel. She had always liked me, in her own cold way, because I was the only one who didn't ask her for money. I asked her for books. I asked her for truth. She thinks she has won. Genevieve, Hattie said softly. She thinks this email will keep you away. She thinks you will be too ashamed to show your face to the board. She is wrong, I said. Good, Hattie said. The company has become sloppy. The numbers do not add up. Genevieve, I have been looking at the quarterly reports. They are fiction. I need someone who can read between the lines. I will bring my own reading glasses, I said. Come prepared. Child, if you step into that house, you are stepping into a shark tank. I am not a fish. Grandmother, I am the water. I will see you Saturday. I hung up. My heart was beating at a steady 60 beats per minute. Total calm. I turned back to my computer. I needed to print. I could not rely on digital projection alone. Technology can fail. Files can be corrupted. Wi-Fi can be cut. But paper? Paper is eternal. Paper is heavy. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I sent the print job to the high-speed industrial printer in the hallway. 300 pages, double-sided, color. Then I reached into my drawer and pulled out a USB drive. It was a matte black stick, unbranded, military-grade encryption. I plugged it in. I began dragging files from the Project Nemesis folder onto the drive. Folder 1, the Caymans. Folder 2, the charity laundromat. Folder 3, the tuition payments. Folder 4, the DNA report. I paused at the last one, the DNA report. That was the nuclear option. I had debated using it for years. It would destroy Arthur. It would destroy the fragile narrative that held the Alcott name together. But they had sent me a bill for $499,000. They had declared war, and in war, you do not leave your best weapon in the armory. I dragged the file onto the USB drive. The progress bar filled up. 20%, 50%, 100%, complete. I pulled the drive out and closed my hand around it. It was cold and small, but it felt heavier than a gold brick. I walked out to the printer. The pages were already stacking up in the output tray, warm and smelling of toner. I picked up the stack. It was thick, a solid brick of evidence. I flipped through the first few pages. There were bank transfer records from Rosalind's personal account to a shell company called Blue Heron Consulting on the exact dates she claimed to be paying for my medical expenses. There were credit card statements showing flight bookings to Milan and Paris under my name. Dated when I was 19 and working double shifts at a diner in Chicago to pay for my textbooks. I had them. I had them all. I went back to my desk and placed the stack of papers into a crisp leather briefcase. I placed the black USB drive in the interior velvet pocket. My assistant, a young man named David, poked his head into my office. Ms. Alcott? The partners are asking if you are coming back to the meeting. I looked at him. No, David, cancel my meetings for the rest of the week. Is everything okay? He asked, looking concerned. Everything is perfect, I said, and for the first time in years, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that just realized the fence around the sheep pen had fallen down. I just have a family reunion to attend. I picked up my briefcase and walked out of the office. The elevator ride down 40 floors felt like a launch sequence. I stepped out into the biting Chicago wind, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. I hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. O'Hare Airport, I said. And drive fast. I have a bill to pay. As the cab merged into traffic, I opened the email one last time on my phone. I looked at the total again. $499,000. Keep the change, I whispered to the screen. I was not going there to pay a debt. I was going there to foreclose on their entire existence. The Alcott family had spent a century building a reputation on lies. It would take me one night to dismantle it with the truth. The audit was beginning, and I was the lead examiner. The flight to the East Coast was turbulent, but the shaking of the cabin did not disturb me. I have learned to find comfort in instability, because at least in turbulence, the forces acting upon you are governed by the laws of physics, not the whims of a narcissist. I ordered a black coffee and stared out the window at the blanket of clouds, allowing my mind to drift back to the origins of the ledger I now carried in my briefcase. To understand why a mother would send her daughter an invoice for $500,000, you have to understand the economy of the Alcott household. In our home, love was not a renewable resource, it was a fixed currency, and Rosalind had decided early on that Beatrice held the monopoly. My memories of childhood are split screen, like a spreadsheet comparing two unequal columns. On the left side was Beatrice. Beatrice wore plaid skirts made of Scottish wool and attended St. Margaret's Academy, where the tuition cost $30,000 a year. She had tutors for French, tutors for cello, and tutors for equestrianism. She was the asset class. Rosalind groomed her to be the perfect debutante, the shiny object to dangle in front of investors and old money families to secure alliances. On the right side was me. I attended the local public high school. It was a perfectly adequate institution, but in Rosalind's eyes, it was a holding pen for the mediocre. I did not get tutors. I got library cards. I did not get writing lessons. I got a bus pass. I was the liability. My existence was an overhead cost she resented paying. I used to wonder if there was something wrong with me, some defect in my soul that made me unworthy of the investment she poured into Beatrice. It took me years to realize that the difference was not in quality, but in compliance. Beatrice was a mirror that reflected what Rosalind wanted to see. I was a window, and through me, she saw things she wanted to ignore. The breaking point, the transaction that finally balanced the books against me, happened when I was 16. It was a Tuesday in November. I came home from school to find the house in chaos. Police officers were standing in the foyer. Rosalind was weeping on the velvet chaise lounge. A performance worthy of an Academy Award. She claimed that her vintage diamond tennis bracelet, an heirloom insured for $40,000, had vanished from her vanity. She pointed a manicured finger at me. She told the officers that I'd been acting out, that I was jealous of Beatrice, that I had stolen it to buy drugs or run away. I stood there, clutching my backpack, too stunned to speak. I had never stolen a thing in my life. I was the kid who returned extra change to the cashier at the grocery store. But Arthur, my father, would not look me in the eye. He stood by the fireplace, staring at his shoes. While the officers searched my room, they found nothing, of course, but the lack of physical evidence did not matter to Rosalind. She claimed I must have pawned it or thrown it away out of spite. That night, she gave Arthur an ultimatum. Either I went, or she did. 2 days later, I was sent to the Sacred Heart Academy for Girls in rural Pennsylvania. The name sounded prestigious, but the reality was grim. It was a dumping ground for the daughters of the wealthy who had become inconvenient. The tuition was a fraction of what St. Margaret's cost, and the amenities reflected that. We slept on thin mattresses, ate starch-heavy meals, and were taught that silence was the highest form of virtue. I spent my 16th year believing I was a criminal. I replayed the events in my head, wondering if I had blacked out, if I was crazy. It was not until I became an auditor that I understood what had actually happened. Years later, while digging through the family archives for my own sanity, I found a bank transfer dated 2 days before the theft. Rosalind had not lost the bracelet. She had sold it to a private dealer in New York for $35,000 cash. She needed the money to cover a gambling debt she had accrued at an underground poker ring she frequented in the city. She staged the theft to explain the bracelet's absence to Arthur and to claim the insurance payout. She got paid twice, once by the dealer, and once by the insurance company. And the cost? Just her youngest daughter's future. That was the first time I realized that my mother did not hate me. Hate implies passion. Hate implies that I mattered. No, to Rosalind. I was simply collateral damage in her financial structuring. I was a write-off. The only reason I did not wither away at Sacred Heart was Hattie. My grandmother was the only Alcott who knew how to make money rather than just spend it. She suspected something was wrong with Rosalind's story, but she could not prove it without destroying the family reputation, which was her religion. So, she did what she could. She engaged in a smuggling operation. Once a month, a package would arrive at the school addressed to the headmistress, but meant for me. Inside were not cookies or sweaters, but books. Hardcover books on forensic economics, corporate law, advanced statistics, and game theory. Tucked inside the pages were letters written in Hattie's sharp, angular script. "Do not cry over fairness." She wrote in one letter when I was 17. "Fairness is a concept invented by the weak to bargain with the strong. The world runs on leverage and liquidity. If you want to survive Rosalind, do not argue with her emotions. Learn to count better than she does." I took that advice into my marrow. I stopped trying to be a writer or an artist, dreams I had harbored in secret. I turned my attention to the cold, hard certainty of numbers. Numbers do not lie. Numbers do not gaslight you. If a column does not balance, there is a reason. There is always a reason. I decided then that I would become a forensic auditor. I would spend my life finding the truth that people like my mother tried to bury under layers of paper. Every fraud I uncovered in my career was a proxy for the one I could not solve at 16. Every executive I sent to prison was a stand-in for Rosalind. The pilot announced our initial descent, and the change in cabin pressure popped my ears. I thought of Arthur, my father. The tragedy of Arthur Alcott was not that he was a bad man, but that he was a weak one. He loved me. I knew that. He used to sneak me candy bars when Rosalind wasn't looking. He taught me how to ride a bike, but his love was conditional on his comfort. He was terrified of Rosalind's rage, her ability to freeze the air in a room with a single glance. He chose the path of least resistance. To keep the peace in the house, he sacrificed his daughter. He let her ship me away. He let her rewrite the narrative of my life. In the email thread attached to the bill, his address was there in the CC line. He hadn't replied. He hadn't called. He was probably sitting in his study right now, staring at the screen, hoping that if he stayed very still, the problem would go away. He was a man who believed that if you ignored a tumor, it would stop growing. He did not understand that silence is also a decision. By not defending me, he had signed the invoice just as clearly as she had. And then there was Beatrice. I pulled out my phone and disabled airplane mode as we broke through the cloud cover. I opened Instagram. There she was. Beatrice had posted a photo an hour ago. She was wearing a white cashmere coat, holding a glass of champagne, standing on the balcony of the family estate. The caption read, "So grateful for family traditions. Getting ready for the big centennial gala. Sending love and light to everyone." 5,000 likes, 300 comments telling her she was an angel, a queen, an inspiration. Beatrice was 32 years old and had never held a job for longer than 6 months. She had tried to launch a jewelry line, a lifestyle blog, and a pet clothing brand. All had failed, quietly absorbed by the family holding company. Currently, she was the ambassador for the Alcott Foundation. It was a title that meant she got paid 6 figures to attend parties and look sympathetic in photographs. She wasn't evil in the way Rosalind was. She was just hollow. She had been fed so much praise her entire life that she had no bones, only ego. She believed the lie because the lie was comfortable. She believed I was the black sheep because it made her the white lamb. She didn't question where the money for her champagne came from. She didn't want to know. Willful ignorance is a luxury that costs a fortune to maintain. That brought me back to the bill. $499,000. Why now? Why this specific amount? For the last 3 hours of the flight, I had not been sleeping. I had been running the numbers in my head. Rosalind was cruel. Yes. But she was also calculating. She would not risk a public scandal just to hurt my feelings. This bill was a tactical maneuver. The Alcott Family Trust, established by my grandfather, had strict bylaws regarding inheritance. A beneficiary could only be removed for gross misconduct or financial negligence resulting in significant loss to the family estate. Rosalind was trying to build a case by sending me a formal invoice for damages and wasted funds, and by copying the board of directors. She was creating a paper trail. She wanted to present this to the board as proof that I was a liability, a drain on resources, a failed investment. If she could convince them that I owed the family $500,000, she could argue that my share of the trust should be forfeited to cover the debt. But why did she need my share? The realization hit me as the plane's wheels touched the tarmac with a violent screech. She didn't just want to hurt me. She needed my money. Rosalind was drowning. The gambling had not stopped at the bracelet. It must have escalated. She had likely burned through her own liquid assets and was now dipping into funds she shouldn't touch. She needed to disinherit me so she could absorb my portion of the trust to cover a hole in the accounts before the fiscal year audit. This wasn't about the past. This wasn't about my failure. This was a desperate attempt to plug a leak on her side of the ship by ripping planks out of mine. I smiled as I gathered my bag. The text message notification from my bank popped up on my screen, confirming my recurring donation to the local animal shelter. $25. Real money. Honest money. Rosalind thought she was playing poker. She thought she could bluff her way through this with a high-stakes bet. She didn't realize that I wasn't playing cards. I was conducting an audit, and in an audit, the house does not always win. The house gets inspected. I stepped off the plane and walked into the terminal. The air in the airport smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, but to me, it smelled like ozone before a storm. I checked the time. It was 4 p.m. The gala started at 7. I had 3 hours to prepare myself for the performance of a lifetime. I wasn't going to the estate to defend myself. I was going to foreclose on a moral bankruptcy that had been accruing interest for 29 years. I walked toward the baggage claim, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the tile. Click, 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 like the ticking of a clock. Rosalind wanted payment? She would get it. But she was going to learn the hard way that when you demand a full accounting of the past, you have to be ready to pay for every single item on the list. I checked into a hotel suite 5 miles from the Alcott estate. It was not a place for sleep. It was a forward operating base. I pushed the room service tray aside, clearing the mahogany desk for my laptop, my encrypted hard drive, and the stack of papers I had printed in Chicago. The curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I needed the darkness. I needed the glow of the monitor. This was where the emotion ended and the autopsy began. I opened the digital copy of the invoice Rosalind had sent. $499,000. It was a nice, round, terrifying number. But numbers are like DNA. They always leave a trail. I cracked my knuckles and started with the first significant anomaly, a line item that had bothered me since I first saw it on my phone during the meeting. Item number 7. Emergency medical intervention and rehabilitation costs. Dated October 12, 2018. Amount, $50,000. I stared at the date. 2018. I was 21 years old. I closed my eyes and accessed my own memory, which is as reliable as any hard drive. Where was I on October 12, 2018? I was in a cubicle in downtown Chicago, working my first job as a junior analyst. I was healthy. I was boring. I had not seen a doctor for anything more serious than a flu shot in 5 years. I certainly had not incurred $50,000 in medical bills. I logged into the National Insurance Database using a backdoor access key I had acquired during a fraud investigation last year. It was a gray area legally. But I was not looking for justice anymore. I was looking for ammunition. I punched in my social security number. I queried the date range. 0 claims. 0 hospital admissions, 0 ambulance rides. So, where did the money go? I looked at the vendor name listed on Rosalind's invoice. Phoenix Wellness Partners, LLC. I switched tabs to the state corporate registry. I typed in the name. No results in Illinois. I tried Delaware. Bingo. Phoenix Wellness Partners was incorporated on October 10th, 2018. Just 2 days before the alleged medical emergency, the registered agent was a generic legal firm in Wilmington. The listed address was a post office box. This was a shell company. I knew the smell of it instantly. It was the scent of dead air and dry ink. I needed to see the money flow. I pulled up the leaked Alcott family bank statements I had archived in Project Nemesis. I filtered for transactions in October 2018. There it was, a wire transfer of $50,000 from Rosalind's personal trust account to Phoenix Wellness Partners. But here was the catch. I followed the routing number of the receiving bank. It did not go to a hospital. It did not go to a rehabilitation center. The money sat in the Delaware account for exactly 4 hours before being wired internationally. Destination: Grand Cayman. Account holder: Blind Trust, number 7421. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the screen washing over my face. The date clicked into place. October 12th, 2018. That was the day I graduated from university. It was the day I called home to tell them I had finished my degree a semester early. Hoping for a congratulations instead, Rosalind had told me that since I was now an adult, I was officially cut off from any family support. She had severed the financial umbilical cord that afternoon, and on that very same day, she had transferred $50,000, money she claimed was for my medical care, into an offshore account. She had used my cutoff date as a cover to siphon money out of the family estate, labeling it as an expense for me, while actually stashing it for herself. She stole from her husband, blamed it on her daughter, and hid the loot on a tropical island. It was elegant, it was evil, but that was just the appetizer. I turned my attention to the next section of the invoice: credit recovery and legal fees. Rosalind claimed she had spent over $100,000 settling debts I had supposedly accrued. This was news to me. I have an 800 credit score. I pay my bills on the 15th of every month. I have never paid a cent of interest in my life. I navigated to the credit bureaus. Usually, I just check the summary. This time, I requested the full, raw data file, the one that shows the deep history, the inquiries, the dormant accounts. The file downloaded. I scrolled past my current cards, an American Express Platinum and a Chase Sapphire, both with zero balances. I kept scrolling back in time, and then my stomach dropped. There were 3 credit cards listed that I had never held in my hand. 1, a black card issued by Centurion Bank, opened January 2015. 2, a Visa Infinite, opened March 2015. 3, a Saks Fifth Avenue store card with a $50,000 limit, opened June 2015. In 2015, I was 18 years old. I was a freshman in college, living on ramen noodles and working at the campus library for $9 an hour. I looked at the balances. They were maxed out, charged off, sold to collections. The total debt was $185,000. The only reason I had not known about this was that someone had been making the bare minimum payments for years to keep the accounts from going to court. And they had listed the billing address as a post office box in Scarsdale, a box I did not own. Who opens 3 high-limit credit cards in the name of an 18-year-old? I needed physical proof. Digital trails are good, but juries and family boards like to see signatures. I picked up my phone. "Miller," I said when the line connected. "Genevieve," the voice on the other end was rough, like gravel in a blender. Miller was a private investigator I had used on a case involving a corrupt senator 3 years ago. He was expensive, unethical, and perfect. "I thought you were out of the game." "I am auditing my own life. Miller, I need a favor. I need transaction receipts, hard copies. From 2015, 3 specific credit card numbers." "That is old paper. Jenna, hard to dig up." "I will pay you double your rate, and I need it in an hour." "Send me the numbers." I encrypted the file and texted it to him. Then I waited. The silence in the hotel room was heavy. I paced the floor. $185,000. If this was what I thought it wasn't just theft. It was identity fraud. It was a federal crime carrying a mandatory prison sentence. 45 minutes later, my email chimed. A secure link from Miller. Subject: Happy birthday. I opened the folder. Miller had worked his magic. He had pulled the archived transaction receipts from the merchants. I opened the first receipt. It was for a purchase at the Hermès boutique in Paris. Dated March 10th, 2015. Amount: $12,000. Item: a Birkin bag. Ostrich leather. I looked at the signature on the receipt. It was a scrawl. Genevieve Alcott. I zoomed in. The G was wrong. My G has a sharp loop at the bottom. This one was round, bubbly. It looked like the handwriting of a child trying to look like an adult. But right below it, in the guarantor line, was a signature I knew better than my own. Rosalind Alcott. She had co-signed. She had authorized the charge. I cross-referenced the date. March 10th, 2015. I was taking a midterm exam in macroeconomics in Chicago. I checked my sister's Instagram archive. Beatrice. I scrolled back 11 years. It took a while. There it was. March 10th, 2015. A photo of Beatrice standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, holding a brand new orange ostrich leather Birkin bag. The caption read, "Thanks to Mommy for the graduation treat. Paris is always a good idea." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest, turning my blood into ice water. Beatrice had flunked out of her first college that year. To cheer her up, Rosalind had taken her to Paris, and they had paid for the entire trip using credit cards opened in my name. They had bought handbags, first-class tickets, and five-star hotel suites using the credit identity of the daughter they despised, knowing that I would be the one left with the wreckage if the bills ever came due. I opened the next receipt. A ski trip to Aspen. Beatrice again. The next one. A spa retreat in Sedona. Beatrice again. It was a pattern. Every time Beatrice had a crisis, a breakup, a failed class, a bad hair day, Rosalind soothed her with luxury. And every single time, she charged it to me. I printed the receipts. I taped them to the wall of the hotel room, creating a timeline of betrayal. 2015. The credit card fraud. 2018. The medical bill laundering. 2020. A tuition loan that was actually a down payment on Beatrice's condo. The picture was completing itself. Rosalind didn't just hate me. That would have been simple. No, she was using me. I was her financial waste bin. I was the bad bank where she dumped her toxic assets so that Beatrice's balance sheet could remain pristine. She was washing money through my identity to prop up the golden child. Rosalind was not just a bad mother. She was a money launderer. She was running a criminal enterprise from the comfort of her suburban mansion. I looked at the timeline on the wall. The $499,000 bill she sent me wasn't a demand for payment. It was a preemptive strike. She knew the debts were about to explode. The credit cards were in default. The shell companies were overdue for tax filings. She was trying to pin the entire mountain of fraud on me before the IRS or the family board found it. She wanted to stand in front of everyone and say, "Look at my irresponsible daughter. She spent all this money, and I am the victim." She wanted to frame me for the crimes she committed against me. I picked up the phone and dialed Miller again. "Did you get the files?" he asked. "I did," I said. "I need one more thing. Miller, I need the flight manifest for a private charter from Teterboro to Miami on New Year's Eve, 2019. "Why?" "Because Beatrice posted a photo on a yacht that day," I said, staring at a printout of my sister's smiling face. "And according to my tuition bill, I was supposedly paying for a semester abroad in London at that exact moment. I want to know who paid for the jet." "I am on it," Miller said. I hung up. I looked at the pile of evidence. It was enough to send Rosalind to federal prison for 20 years. It was enough to destroy the Alcott name. I felt a vibration in my pocket. A text from my father. "Arthur, please don't come on Saturday. It will only make things worse. Just apologize to your mother." I stared at the message. Just apologize. He had no idea. He thought this was a family spat. He thought this was about feelings. He did not realize that I wasn't coming to argue. I was coming to perform an amputation. I typed a reply, then deleted it. He didn't deserve a warning. I turned back to my laptop. I opened a new file and named it The Alcott Forensic Audit. Executive Summary. I began to type. Objective: to reconcile the discrepancies between the claimed expenditures of Rosalind Alcott and the actual allocation of family funds. Finding 1. Systematic identity theft. Finding 2. Embezzlement of trust assets. Finding 3. Tax evasion via shell entities. The keyboard clattered in the quiet room. Sounding like gunfire, I was not writing a story, I was writing an indictment. And when I walked into that party on Saturday, I would not be the daughter returning home. I would be the grim reaper of their financial sins. The bill was due, and I was going to collect it in blood and assets. The invitation arrived by courier on Thursday afternoon. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope, the kind that costs more to manufacture than most people spend on lunch. The paper stock was thick, textured like linen, and the calligraphy was embossed in gold leaf. It read, "The Alcott Group requests the honor of your presence at the 100th anniversary gala." It did not feel like an invitation. It felt like a subpoena. I held it in my hand, weighing it. It was funny how a piece of paper could carry so much gravitational pull. This was the ticket to the arena. For 29 years. The Alcott estate had been a fortress I was trying to escape, or a club I was trying to join. Now, it was just a crime scene. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text message from Rosalind. "I assume you received the card. Do not embarrass us. Bring the check for the full amount, or do not bother coming. Beatrice has worked very hard on this event, and I will not have your sullen face ruining her night unless you are coming to make things right." I stared at the screen. Bring the check. She was so confident. She truly believed that I was scrambling, that I was calling banks, begging for loans, or perhaps crying in a corner somewhere, terrified of being disowned. She had no idea that I had indeed prepared a form of payment, but it was not the kind that could be deposited at a bank. I did not reply. In negotiation, silence is leverage. If you speak, you reveal your position. If you stay silent, the other party has to guess. I wanted Rosalind guessing. I wanted her to wonder if I was coming to beg or coming to fight. An hour later, the landline in my hotel suite rang. I picked it up. "She is nervous," a voice said without preamble. It was Hattie. "How do you know?" I asked. "She has been drinking sherry since noon," my grandmother rasped. "She keeps checking the guest list. She asked Arthur 3 times if he had heard from you. She is trying to project strength, but she is terrified. Genevieve, a rat always knows when the ship is taking on water, even before the captain does. I am coming, grandmother. I know you are, but listen to me. This is not a family dinner. This is a boardroom coup disguised as a party. The board of directors will be there. The shareholders will be there. Rosalind plans to announce Beatrice as the heir apparent tonight. She plans to use your debt as the justification for cutting you out of the trust entirely. Let her try, I said. Do not underestimate her, Hattie warned. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the static. She is cornered, and a cornered animal bites. Do not bring emotions to this fight. Genevieve, bring facts. Bring the cold, hard steel of the truth. If you falter, if you cry, if you show 1 ounce of weakness, she will tear you apart in front of half the eastern seaboard. I have the evidence. Hattie, I have everything. Then bring it. And Genevieve, do not disappoint me. I have waited 30 years for someone to clean up this house. Do not leave a single speck of dust. The line went dead. I hung up and turned to the garment bag hanging in the closet. Rosalind expected me to show up in something apologetic. She probably imagined me in a drab gray dress, looking like the penitent daughter, or perhaps something cheap and ill-fitting that she could sneer at. She expected me to look like the failure she had billed me as. I unzipped the bag. Inside was a suit I had commissioned 2 days ago from a tailor in the city who usually dressed defense attorneys for high-stakes murder trials. It was not black. It was not gray. It was white, stark, blinding, optical white. It was a tuxedo cut, with sharp, satin lapels and trousers that fell in a perfect, razor-straight line. It was not a dress for a party. It was a uniform for war. White is the color of innocence, yes, but in my world, white is the color of exposure. It is the color of a blank page before the audit begins. It is the color of the light you shine into the dark corners where the cockroaches hide. I would stand out in that room like a flare in a coal mine. I wanted them to look at me. I wanted nowhere to hide. Friday morning was spent with my lawyer, not the corporate counsel from my firm, but a specialist I had retained named Marcus. Marcus was a quiet man who specialized in what he called aggressive asset recovery. We sat in a rented conference room, the air conditioning humming a low drone. "This is the document," Marcus said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "It is a qui tam disclosure combined with a formal affidavit of financial misconduct. Once you present this to the board, they have a fiduciary duty to investigate. They cannot ignore it. If they do, they become personally liable for the fraud." I flipped through the pages. It was beautiful. It was a cage made of words. "And the disclaimer?" I asked. "It is in there," Marcus pointed to paragraph 4. "It states that you are bringing this information forward not for personal gain, but to protect the integrity of the Alcott Trust. It nullifies Rosalind's argument that you are acting out of spite. You are acting as a whistleblower." "Perfect," I said. I signed the last page. The pen scratched loudly on the paper. "Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" "Genevieve?" Marcus asked, capping his pen. "I can have a process server deliver this. You do not have to be in that room." "Yes," I said. "I do. They need to see me. They need to see that the person destroying them is not a stranger. It is the daughter they wrote off." Saturday evening arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. I stood in front of the mirror in my hotel room. The white suit fit like a second skin. I had pulled my hair back into a severe, tight bun. No loose strands, no chaos. I applied red lipstick, a shade called Victory. It was the only color on me. There was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Liam standing there. Liam was my boyfriend, although partner felt like a better word. He was a criminal defense attorney in Chicago, a man who spent his days arguing with judges and his nights trying to get me to relax. He was wearing a tuxedo, and he looked worried. "You look." He paused, his eyes traveling over the white suit. "You look dangerous." "That is the point," I said. "Let me drive you," Liam said, stepping into the room. "Let me go with you. Jen, you shouldn't have to walk into that snake pit alone. I can stand next to you. I can be the bad guy if you need me to be." I looked at him. He was good. He was safe. He wanted to protect me, and that was exactly why he could not come. "No," I said softly, adjusting his bow tie even though it was already perfect. "If you come, they will say I needed a man to fight my battles. They will say I am being manipulated by my boyfriend. This has to be me, Liam, just me. It started with me and my mother, and it has to end with me and my mother. They are going to come at you hard." Liam said, "Rosalind is vicious." "I know," I said, "but she is fighting a daughter. She does not realize she is fighting an auditor. She thinks she can make me cry. She doesn't know I have already liquidated my tears." "Okay," Liam said, realizing he could not stop me. He kissed my forehead. "But keep your phone on. If things go south, if you need an extraction, I am 5 minutes away." "If things go south," I said, picking up my briefcase, "it won't be for me." I walked down to the valet stand. My car was waiting, a rental, but a nice one, a black sedan with tinted windows. I placed the briefcase on the passenger seat. Inside were the 300 printed pages, the USB drive, and the signed affidavit. I merged onto the highway, heading east toward the coast. The drive was 45 minutes. I did not listen to music. I drove in silence. My mind was rehearsing the opening moves. I visualized the layout of the Alcott mansion, the grand ballroom, the projector screen they always set up for the speeches. The location of the sound system, I felt a tightness in my chest, a physical manifestation of 29 years of conditioning. My body remembered the fear of that house even if my mind had conquered it. I remembered the way the floorboards creaked in the hallway when I tried to sneak to the kitchen for food. I remembered the cold draft in the attic. I remembered the smell of Rosalind's perfume, gardenias and old money, which always signaled that judgment was coming. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Breathe. I told myself, you are not Genevieve the child. You are Genevieve the auditor. You are not going home. You are going to a site inspection. I turned off the highway and onto the private road that led to Alcott Manor. The trees on either side of the road formed a tunnel of dark branches. The gravel crunched under my tires, and then I saw the gates. They were open, iron wrought into intricate swirls, topped with the family crest. Beyond them, the driveway swept up a hill toward the house. The house was lit up like a cruise ship. Floodlights bathed the stone facade in a golden glow. It looked majestic. It looked important. It looked like the kind of place where happy families lived. But I knew better. I knew that the foundation was cracked. I knew that the roof leaked. I knew that the heating system was antiquated and cost a fortune to run. And I knew that the people inside were rotting from the inside out. The driveway was packed with cars, Rolls-Royces, Bentleys, Ferraris. The wealth on display was staggering. This was the 100th anniversary. After all, every creditor, every business partner, every sycophant in the tri-state area was here to kiss the ring. I pulled my humble rental sedan up to the valet stand. The young man in the red vest looked at my car with a hint of disdain before he saw me step out. I emerged from the car. The white suit caught the light of the flood lamps. I stood up straight, smoothing the lapels. The valet's eyes widened. He didn't know who I was, but he knew I wasn't there to serve hors d'oeuvres. I handed him the keys. "Keep it close," I said. "I won't be staying the night." I grabbed my briefcase. The weight of it was reassuring. It anchored me to the earth. I walked up the stone steps to the massive oak front doors. I could hear the music from inside. A string quartet playing Vivaldi. It sounded elegant. It sounded civilized. I reached for the heavy brass handle. Rosalind had told me to bring a check. She had told me to pay for the cost of raising a failure. I pushed the door open. "I am here. Mother," I thought as the warm air and the scent of expensive lilies hit my face. "And I have brought the bill." The grand ballroom of the Alcott estate was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space of marble and gold leaf, illuminated by 3 massive crystal chandeliers that had hung there since the 1920s. Tonight, they cast a fractured, glittering light over 400 of the East Coast's social elite. The air smelled of expensive perfume, truffle oil, and the distinct, metallic scent of desperation masked by heavy liquidity. I stood at the entrance, a singular figure in white against a sea of black tuxedos and midnight blue gowns. The string quartet in the corner was playing something by Mozart, a cheerful, fluttering piece that felt grotesque against the tension radiating from my chest. As I took my first step onto the parquet floor, the room did not go silent all at once. It happened in ripples. A conversation died near the door. Then a head turned. Then a whisper was exchanged behind a manicured hand, like a contagion. The silence spread outward from where I stood, until even the quartet seemed to hesitate on a downbeat. They knew. Everyone in this room knew. Rosalind had not just CC'd the board of directors on that email, she had CC'd the social hierarchy. Every aunt, uncle, cousin, and business rival here had seen the invoice. They had seen the itemized list of my failures in their eyes. I was not a guest. I was a walking bad debt. I was a breached contract in human form. I moved through the crowd. The Red Sea did not part for Moses with as much speed as the Alcott social circle parted for me. I saw my Uncle Robert standing near the ice sculpture. He was a man who had made his fortune in pharmaceuticals and was currently under investigation by the SEC for insider trading. Though no one talked about that at parties, he saw me coming and immediately turned his back. pretending to be fascinated by a tray of smoked salmon canapes. Genevieve, a voice dripped with faux sweetness to my left. I turned to see Cousin Felicity. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than my first car, and she was clutching a glass of champagne like a lifeline. Felicity had never worked a day in her life. Her profession was philanthropist, which in this family meant she attended luncheons and signed checks drawn on accounts she did not understand. "We didn't think you would come," Felicity said, her eyes scanning my white suit with a mixture of confusion and pity. "After the email, it was so brave of you to show up. Really, I would have died of shame." "Shame is for people who have something to hide. Felicity," I said, my voice level. "I am just here to settle accounts." "Oh," she blinked, clearly not understanding the double entendre. "Well, try not to cause a scene. Beatrice is so nervous. This is her big night." "I am sure she is," I said, and walked past her. I navigated toward the center of the room. The atmosphere was stifling. It was a masquerade where everyone was wearing their own faces. But the expressions were all masks. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Handshakes that were really assessments of net worth. I felt the weight of the USB drive in my pocket, a cold reminder of reality in a room built on fantasy. Then, I saw her. Rosalind Alcott was holding court near the head table. She looked undeniably magnificent, in the way an apex predator looks magnificent right before it kills something. She was wearing a gown of emerald green velvet that pooled around her feet. But it was the jewelry that caught my auditor's eye. Around her neck was the solstice necklace. It was a custom piece, platinum set, with 20 carats of diamonds and a center emerald the size of a quail egg. I stared at it. I knew that necklace. I had seen the invoice for it in the Project Nemesis files 3 nights ago. It had been purchased 6 months ago from a jeweler in Zurich. The funds used to pay for it had been wire transferred from the Alcott Emerging Artists Scholarship Fund. That necklace was supposed to send 10 underprivileged kids to art school. Instead, it was draped around my mother's neck, glittering under the chandeliers. She was wearing stolen futures. Rosalind was laughing at something a senator was saying, her head thrown back, her hand resting lightly on the senator's arm. She looked radiant, victorious. Then, her eyes swept across the room and landed on me. The laughter stopped. Her expression did not crumble. It hardened. Her eyes narrowed into slits, assessing my white suit, my briefcase, my lack of visible shame. She said something to the senator, excused herself, and stood her ground, waiting for me to approach. She wanted me to come to her. She wanted me to bend the knee. I did not go to her. I stopped 10 feet away, near a pillar, and simply watched. Next to Rosalind stood Beatrice. If Rosalind was the queen, Beatrice was the terrified princess in the tower. My sister was wearing a pale pink gown that made her look innocent, almost childlike. She was smiling and nodding at a donor, but her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped bird. When she saw me, she froze. She dropped her clutch purse. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Beatrice knew. She might not know the extent of the audit I had performed, but she knew about the credit cards. She knew about the trips to Paris. She knew that her entire life was a house of cards built on my credit score. Seeing me there, looking not like a victim but like a prosecutor, terrified her. She bent down to retrieve her purse, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't grasp the silk strap on the first try. I shifted my gaze to the bar area. There, standing with a glass of scotch that looked like it had been refilled too many times, was my father, Arthur. He looked older than I remembered. His tuxedo hung loosely on his frame, as if he had shrunk inside it. He was listening to a business partner drone on about market volatility, but his eyes were vacant. Then, he saw me. For a second, the mask slipped. His face broke into an expression of raw, unguarded pain. He took a step toward me, his hand half raised as if to wave or reach out. "Genevieve?" I saw his lips form my name. He took another step. Disregarding the business partner, he actually looked like he was going to come to me. He looked like he wanted to hug me. But before he could take a third step, Rosalind was there. She had crossed the distance between them with the speed of a viper. She hooked her arm through his, her fingers digging into his bicep hard enough to leave a bruise through the fabric. "Arthur," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd, bright and sharp. "The senator was just asking about the merger. You must come and say hello." Arthur hesitated. He looked at me, then at Rosalind. I saw the struggle in his eyes. The war between the father he wanted to be and the coward he had become. The coward won. He lowered his head, let out a defeated sigh, and allowed Rosalind to drag him away toward the VIP section. He didn't look back. That was the final line item on his personal invoice. Abandonment. Recurring charge. I turned away from them and looked toward the stage. Seated in a high-backed chair that looked suspiciously like a throne was Hattie. My grandmother was 90 years old, but she sat with a spine of steel. She was dressed in black lace, holding an ebony cane topped with a silver lion's head. She was not mingling. She was not smiling. She was observing. She was the only person in the room who wasn't pretending. Our eyes met across the ballroom. The crowd moved between us, a blur of silk and diamonds, but her gaze was a laser. She looked at my white suit. She looked at the briefcase in my hand. She didn't smile, but she gave a single, slow nod. It was a microscopic movement, invisible to anyone who didn't know her, but to me. It was a firing order. Proceed. A chime sounded through the room, a spoon tapping against a crystal glass, amplified by the microphone system. The room fell silent. The lights dimmed, leaving only the spotlight on the stage. Rosalind walked up the stairs to the podium. She adjusted the microphone. The emerald on her neck flashing green fire, she looked out at the audience, her face composed into a mask of benevolent matriarchy. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice rich and cultivated. "Welcome to our home, 100 years, a century of legacy, a century of building something that lasts." The crowd applauded politely. Rosalind smiled, soaking it in. "We are here to celebrate the past," she continued, "but also the future. The Alcott name is more than just a business. It is a promise of integrity, of charity, and of family values." I almost laughed out loud. The word integrity coming from her mouth was like hearing a pyromaniac give a lecture on fire safety. "I look at my family tonight," Rosalind said, gesturing to where Arthur and Beatrice were standing, "and I am filled with pride. My husband, Arthur, who has steered this ship through storms." Arthur looked at the floor. "And my daughter, Beatrice." Rosalind beamed. "Our golden girl, the face of our foundation. Beatrice has dedicated her life to helping others, to carrying the torch of compassion that my husband's father lit so many years ago." Beatrice stepped forward. Performing a shy, humble curtsy, the crowd clapped louder. They loved her. They loved the image of her. However, Rosalind's tone shifted. It dropped an octave, becoming somber, heavy with staged regret. "A family is not always perfect. We have our trials. We have our burdens." She turned her head. The spotlight did not move, but her eyes cut through the darkness and found me standing by the pillar. "We have those who struggle to find their way," she said, her voice trembling with artificial emotion. "Those who reject our values. Those who take, but do not give." The room went deadly silent. 400 pairs of eyes turned to follow her gaze. They landed on me, the woman in white. "My younger daughter, Genevieve, is here tonight," Rosalind said into the microphone. Unexpectedly, there was a ripple of nervous laughter. "Genevieve," Rosalind addressed me directly, amplifying her voice so it boomed off the vaulted ceiling. "I sent you a letter this week. A difficult letter, a necessary letter. I did it because I love you. I did it because sometimes tough love is the only way to teach a child the value of $1. She paused for effect. She was enjoying this. This was the public shaming she had fantasized about. She was framing the narrative before I could even open my mouth. She was painting herself as the long-suffering mother and me as the prodigal failure. "I hope," she continued, her voice dripping with condescension, That you have come here tonight not to cause a scene, but because you have finally learned your lesson. I hope you are here to take responsibility for your debts, to apologize to your sister for the burden you have been, and to rejoin this family as a contributing member. Starting with settling the account I sent you. She smiled. A predatory baring of teeth. Did you bring it, Genevieve? Did you bring the check? The room held its breath. The silence was absolute. The air conditioner hummed. A glass clinked somewhere in the back. Rosalind stood on the stage, the queen of her domain. Believing she had checkmated me, she thought I would run. She thought I would cry. She thought the social pressure of 400 wealthy witnesses would crush me into submission. I stepped away from the pillar. My heels clicked on the marble floor. Click, click, click. The sound was crisp, rhythmic, and terrifyingly calm. I walked toward the stage. I did not look angry. I did not look sad. I looked like I was walking into a boardroom to deliver a quarterly report that was going to result in mass layoffs. I did bring something. Mother, I said. My voice was not amplified, but in the acoustic perfection of the ballroom, it carried clear and cold to the back row. I lifted the briefcase. But I think you are confused about the currency, I said, continuing my slow march toward the steps. You asked for a settlement. You asked for an accounting of what it cost to raise me. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I looked up at her. She was faltering slightly now. The confidence was flickering. She hadn't expected me to speak. She hadn't expected the briefcase. I ran the numbers. Rosalind, I said. Using her first name, it hit her like a slap. And you are right. There is a debt. There is a massive outstanding balance that is overdue. I walked up the first step. But you calculated it wrong, I said. I walked up the second step. You forgot to factor in the fraud, I said. I reached the top of the stage. I was standing next to her now. I was taller than her in my heels. The white suit blazed under the spotlight, making her green velvet look dark and murky. So, I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the USB drive. I didn't bring a check. I brought an audit. I turned to the AV technician, a young guy in a black t-shirt who looked terrified. Plug this in, I ordered. Rosalind lunged for the microphone. Cut it, she screamed, her mask falling away completely. Cut the sound. Security, get her off this stage. But it was too late. Hattie had raised her cane. The head of security, a man who had worked for my grandfather for 30 years and who knew exactly who signed the real checks, stood still. He folded his arms. The AV technician looked at Hattie. Hattie nodded. He took the USB drive from my hand. I looked back at the audience, at the sea of shocked faces, at the frozen waiters, at Beatrice, who was now weeping silently, at Arthur, who was staring at me with his mouth open. Get comfortable, everyone, I said, my voice projecting without the mic, fueled by pure adrenaline. This is going to be a long presentation, and I promise you, the math is going to be fascinating. The screen behind us flickered to life. The first slide appeared. It was not a title card. It was a scanned image of the invoice Rosalind had sent me, blown up to 10 feet tall, with the red circle around the $499,000 figure. Let's begin with item 1, I said. The party was over. The trial had begun. The standoff on the stage lasted for perhaps 3 seconds, but in the currency of social capital, it cost Rosalind everything she had spent the last decade accumulating. She realized that her verbal command to cut the feed had failed. The audience was not looking at her with adoration anymore. They were looking at the spectacle with the hungry, predatory gaze of Romans at the Colosseum. They smelled blood, and they did not care whose veins it flowed from. Rosalind, realizing she was losing the room, made a desperate tactical pivot. She snatched the remote control from the podium lectern before I could signal the technician again. Her hand was shaking, the diamonds on her fingers scattering frantic light, but her thumb mashed the next button with violent force. You want to talk about numbers, Genevieve? She hissed, her voice amplified by the lapel microphone she was still wearing. Fine, let us show them the numbers. The screen behind us, which had been blank for a moment, suddenly blazed with blinding white light. Rosalind had prepared a slideshow for this evening. I had assumed it would be a montage of Beatrice's charity work or perhaps a retrospective of the company. I was wrong. Rosalind had prepared a public execution. The image that filled the 100-inch projection screen was a high-definition scan of the invoice, the same PDF she had emailed me, but up here, looming over the ballroom, the figures were monstrous. The total, $499,000, was circled in thick, jagged red marker. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was the sound of 400 wealthy people simultaneously realizing that the veil of polite society had just been ripped down. Rosalind turned to the crowd, tears instantly welling in her eyes. It was a terrifying physiological trick she had mastered years ago. "I did not want to do this," she sobbed, her voice breaking perfectly on the last word. "I tried to keep this private. I tried to handle this within the family. But my daughter left me no choice. Look at this." She gestured grandly to the screen, her arms sweeping over the list of expenses. "This is the cost of raising a child who refuses to grow up. This is the cost of bail money, of rehabs that never happened, of legal fees to keep her out of jail. I have paid for her mistakes for 29 years. And what do I get in return? She comes here, to her sister's night of triumph, wearing a suit meant to mock us, threatening me with lies." She turned to Beatrice, who was standing a few feet away, clutching a napkin. Beatrice took her cue. She stepped forward, her face a portrait of sisterly concern. "Genevieve, please," Beatrice said, her voice trembling. "We do not want your money. We just want you to take responsibility. Mom is only doing this to help you hit rock bottom so you can finally climb up. We love you. Please, just apologize." Rosalind nodded, wiping a tear that had managed to track down her cheek without ruining her foundation. "That is all we ask," she said, regaining her composure and adopting the tone of a benevolent judge. "Come here, Genevieve. Stand before your family. Stand before the people who have supported us for a century. Apologize for the pain you have caused. Commit to paying this debt, not because we need the money, but because you need to learn honor. Do that, and all is forgiven." She extended her hand toward me. The palm was open. It looked like an invitation. I knew it was a bear trap. The room was dead silent. The string quartet had lowered their bows. The waiters were frozen with trays of champagne. Everyone was waiting for the prodigal daughter to crumble. They expected me to weep. They expected me to fall to my knees and beg for the matriarch's forgiveness, because that is how these stories are supposed to go. The rebellious child is crushed by the weight of the family legacy and returns to the fold, broken and obedient. I looked at Rosalind's hand. Then I looked at the screen. $499,000. I took a step forward. The sound of my heel hitting the wooden stage was singular and sharp. Clack! I took another step. Clack! I walked with the slow, deliberate cadence of a metronome. I did not look at the crowd. I locked eyes with Rosalind. I saw the triumph flare in her pupils. She thought she had won. She thought I was walking toward her to take her hand. She thought the pressure had broken me. I reached the podium. Rosalind smiled, a small, tight victory of the lips. She moved to hand me the microphone, ready for my confession. I ignored the microphone. I ignored her hand. I reached into the breast pocket of my white blazer. Rosalind flinched, perhaps thinking I was reaching for a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out the black USB drive. I turned to the laptop that was sitting on the side table of the podium, the nerve center for the projection system. The AV technician reached out to stop me, but I shot him a look so cold it could have frozen helium. He recoiled, pulling his hands back as if the keyboard were red hot. "Genevieve, what are you doing?" Rosalind demanded, her voice losing its tragic timbre and edging into panic. "Do not touch that." I didn't answer. I inserted the drive into the port. The computer chimed, a small, cheerful sound that echoed strangely in the tense room. I placed my hand on the mouse. I felt the plastic click under my finger. "You are right, Mother," I said, I did not use the microphone, but I pitched my voice from the diaphragm, a trick I had learned from a courtroom prosecutor. We do need transparency. Transparency is the only thing that separates a business from a racket. Rosalind froze. The script was changing, and she did not have the new pages. And you are right about the bill, I continued, my eyes scanning the file directory that popped up on the laptop screen. There is a cost to raising a failure, but you made a fundamental accounting error. I found the file. Project_nemesis_final_presentation ... pptx ... You forgot to calculate the interest, I said. I double-clicked. The screen behind us flickered. The image of the $499,000 invoice vanished. The red circle, the accusations, the lies. They were wiped away in a millisecond of digital refresh. In its place, a new title slide appeared. It was stark black, with white, sans serif text that looked like a government warning. The Alcott Forensic Audit, subject: Rosalind Alcott, Beatrice Alcott. Status: insolvent. The gasp from the crowd this time was different. It wasn't shock. It was confusion. They were reading the words, trying to process the shift from family drama to corporate indictment. Rosalind stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "Turn it off," she whispered, grabbing my arm. Her nails dug into the fabric of my suit. "Genevieve, I am warning you. Turn it off right now or I will have you arrested." I looked down at her hand on my arm. "Touch me again," I said, my voice low and lethal, "and I will add assault to the list of felonies I'm about to present." She snatched her hand back as if she had been burned. I looked out at the audience. I saw my grandmother, Hattie, sitting in the front row. She was leaning forward on her cane, her eyes bright and fierce. She gave me a single, sharp nod. "Burn it down," her eyes said. I turned back to the laptop and hit the space bar. Slide 1. The Educational Trust Fund Embezzlement. The screen filled with a split image. On the left was the invoice Rosalind had sent me, specifically the line item demanding $80,000 for wasted educational investment. On the right was a scanned bank document from the Alcott Family Trust, dated August 2014. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," I said, addressing the room as if they were a jury, "my mother claims she spent $80,000 on my tuition. She claims I wasted it." I pointed to the document on the right. "This is the withdrawal slip from the family trust for my tuition," I explained. "As you can see, the funds were withdrawn. However, they were never sent to the university. I paid for my own education by working nights at a diner and taking out federal loans. I have the receipts in my briefcase." I hit the spacebar again. An animation played, highlighting the destination of the funds. The $80,000 was transferred to a dealership in Greenwich, Connecticut, I said, for the purchase of a Porsche Cayenne, the same Porsche that is currently parked in the valet lot with the license plate ROSLIND1. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw heads turning toward the windows, as if they could see the car from here. "She didn't pay for my education," I said, my voice rising. "She drove it." "Liar!" Rosalind shrieked. She lunged for the laptop, trying to slam the lid shut. I blocked her with my body, using my shoulder to check her backward. She stumbled in her heavy velvet gown, catching herself on the podium. "Sit down, Mother," I commanded. "We are just getting started." I hit the spacebar. Slide 2. The Paris incident. The screen changed. This time, it showed a credit card statement. The name at the top was Genevieve Alcott. The date was March 2015. "Item 2, I narrated, moving into the rhythm of the audit. $185,000 in credit card debt. Debt that my mother claims proves I am financially irresponsible. Debt she says justified cutting me off. I pointed to the transactions listed on the screen. Hermes, Paris, Four Seasons, George V, Le Jules Verne, Restaurant. I was 19 years old when these charges were made, I said. I was in Chicago, taking midterms. I have my transcript and my work schedule to prove it. I hit the key again. The photo from Beatrice's Instagram appeared next to the statement. Beatrice in front of the Eiffel Tower. Beatrice holding the orange Hermes bag. Beatrice drinking champagne at the George V. "This is Beatrice," I said, gesturing to my sister, who had turned a shade of pale usually reserved for corpses. Spending $12,000 on a handbag using a credit card opened in my name, my signature was forged, my credit score was destroyed, and my mother co-signed for every single transaction. The crowd turned to look at Beatrice. She backed away, shaking her head. "No," she whispered. "My mom said it was a gift. She said it was from the trust." "She lied to you too, Beatrice," I said, though I felt no pity. "She bought your love with my credit rating." "This is absurd," Rosalind yelled. Trying to rally, she turned to the crowd, her arms wide. "These are fabrications. Photoshop. My daughter is mentally unstable. She is hallucinating." "The IRS does not hallucinate. Mother," I cut her off. I hit the space bar. Slide 3. The tax fraud. "For the last 10 years, I said, Rosalind Alcott has claimed me as a dependent on her tax returns. Specifically, she has filed under a special provision for adult children with incapacitating disabilities. She claims I am unable to work or care for myself." I brought up the tax filings. There it was, in black and white. Genevieve Alcott. Dependent. Disabled. "I am a senior forensic auditor for one of the most aggressive firms in Chicago," I said. "I pay taxes in the highest bracket. By claiming me as a dependent, Rosalind has evaded approximately $400,000 in federal income tax." I paused. I looked directly at the table where the family lawyers were sitting. They were not drinking champagne anymore. They were frantically typing on their phones. "That is a felony," I said. 5 years in federal prison, per count." Rosalind was panting now. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving. She looked around for Arthur, for security, for anyone to stop the bleeding, but no one moved. The wealthy understand one thing above all else: self-preservation. When a ship sinks, you do not help the captain bailing water with a teaspoon. You get on the lifeboat, and right now, Rosalind was the Titanic. "You ungrateful little wretch," Rosalind spat, her voice dropping the veneer of civility. "I gave you life. I gave you everything." "You gave me a bill," I corrected her. "And now I am processing the refund." "Arthur!" Rosalind screamed at my father. "Do something! She is destroying us!" Arthur stood up. He looked at the screen. He looked at the tax returns. He looked at the credit card statements. He looked at the Porsche receipt. He walked toward the stage. Rosalind let out a breath of relief. "Get her off," she ordered him. "Smash that computer." Arthur climbed the stairs. He stood in front of me. He looked into my eyes. For the first time in 29 years, I saw something in his face that wasn't fear. It was horror. He turned to Rosalind. "You told me the Porsche was a bonus from the board," he said quietly. "It doesn't matter," Rosalind hissed. "And you told me Genevieve was in rehab," Arthur said, his voice gaining strength. "That is why we sent the money to Cayman. You said she was sick." "She is sick," Rosalind shrieked. "Look at her. She is attacking her own mother." Arthur looked at the screen again. He looked at the slide showing the offshore transfer. "That is my signature on the authorization," Arthur said, his face going gray. "You made me sign it. You told me it was for her medical bills." "Arthur, stop it," Rosalind warned. "I didn't know," Arthur whispered, looking at me. "Jenna, I swear I didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense in a court of law." "Dad," I said softly, "but it might help with the plea deal." "Enough!" Rosalind lunged at me again, her hand raised to strike. "Sit down." The voice did not come from me. It came from the center of the room. It was a voice like cracking thunder. Hattie Alcott had stood up. She pounded her cane on the floor. Thud. "Let her finish," Hattie commanded. "I want to see the rest." Rosalind froze. her hand in midair. She looked at Hattie with pure terror. She could bully Arthur. She could manipulate Beatrice. She could try to crush me, but she could not defy Hattie. "But Mother Alcott," Rosalind stammered. "I said sit down." Hattie barked. Rosalind lowered her hand. She retreated to the far side of the stage, collapsing onto a chair, shrinking into her emerald dress like a dying witch. I took a deep breath. The room was mine. The narrative was mine. "Thank you, grandmother," I said. I turned back to the laptop. "Now," I said, "let's discuss the golden child." I hit the spacebar. Slide 4, the Beatrice expenses. Beatrice let out a small whimper, the sound of a balloon slowly losing air. I didn't look at her. I looked at the data. Because numbers don't care about tears. Numbers only care about the truth. The room was vibrating with the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. The air pressure had dropped. The socialite chatter had been extinguished. All 400 guests were no longer looking at each other. Their eyes were glued to the 100-inch projection screen hovering above the stage like a digital guillotine. I stood at the podium, my hand resting on the laptop. I could feel the heat radiating from the machine, or perhaps it was the heat of Rosalind's hatred burning into the side of my face. She was slumped in her chair, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps, but her eyes were darting around the room, looking for an exit strategy that did not exist. "An audit," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "is not an accusation, it is a reconciliation of facts. And the first fact we need to reconcile is the narrative of my education." I pressed the right arrow key. Slide 1. The cost of knowledge. The screen split down the middle. On the left side was a blown-up section of Rosalind's invoice to me. It showed the line item: university tuition and living expenses, $80,000. On the right side of the screen, I projected a document that made the room gasp. It was a scanned image of my Navient student loan statement, dated just last month. The balance read, $32,450 remaining. "For 4 years," I began, pacing slowly across the stage, letting the heels of my white shoes mark the rhythm of the prosecution. My mother told the family board that she was paying for my tuition at the University of Illinois. She withdrew $20,000 a semester from the Alcott Education Trust. She claimed she was supporting her struggling daughter. I pointed to the document on the right. But as you can see, the university never received a dime from Rosalind Alcott. I paid for my degree with federal loans, Pell Grants, and 3 part-time jobs. I graduated with $40,000 in debt. I am still paying it off at 6.8% interest. I turned to look at my Uncle Robert in the front row. He looked pale. He was on the board that approved those withdrawals. "So," I asked, "where did the $80,000 go?" I hit the key again. An animation overlaid the screen. A bright red line traced the path of the money. From Alcott Education Trust to R.A. Personal Holdings to Greenwich Luxury Imports. A photo appeared on the screen. It was a candid shot taken in the driveway of this very estate 7 years ago. It showed Rosalind posing next to a brand-new, pearl-white Porsche Cayenne Turbo. She was beaming, holding a glass of champagne. "She demanded $80,000 from me for an education she stole," I said, my voice dropping to a register of pure, cold steel. "But in reality, she liquidated my future to buy the leather seats she drives to the country club. The car isn't a bonus. Uncle Robert, the car is my diploma." Rosalind made a noise in her throat, a strangled sound of protest. But she didn't speak. She couldn't. The bank routing numbers were right there on the screen. 10 feet tall. There is no arguing with a routing number. "But theft is simple." I continued. "What comes next is cruelty." I hit the arrow key. Slide 2. The Tale of Two Sisters. The screen changed again. This time, it was a timeline, a horizontal axis stretching across the year 2015. On the top half of the timeline, labeled Genevieve, were scanned images of my time cards from The Grind, A coffee shop in Wicker Park where I worked during college. The timestamps were brutal. Start, 5:30 in the morning. End, 2 in the afternoon. Start, 6 in the evening. End, midnight. In March of 2015, I narrated, I was working double shifts to pay for my textbooks. I was living in a basement apartment with no heat. I was eating ramen noodles because I had $12 in my bank account. I hit the spacebar. On the bottom half of the timeline, labeled Beatrice, a series of photos appeared. They were high-resolution screenshots from Beatrice's Instagram, which she had foolishly left public. The first photo showed Beatrice sitting at a cafe in Paris. The Eiffel Tower sparkling in the background. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses. The second photo showed her in Milan, holding gelato. The third showed her in a first-class cabin on British Airways, clinking glasses with Rosalind. But it was the overlay that mattered. I superimposed the credit card transactions over the photos. Next to the Paris photo, Visa signature ending in 4119, charge, Le Jules Verne Restaurant, amount, $600. Next to the Milan photo, charge, Prada, Via Monte Napoleone, amount, $3,200. These credit cards, I said, pointing to the transaction list, were opened in my name. The billing address was a P.O. box I didn't know existed. The authorized user was Beatrice Alcott. The guarantor was Rosalind Alcott. I turned to look at Beatrice. She was standing near the edge of the stage, her hands trembling so violently that the champagne flute she was holding was sloshing liquid over the rim. Beatrice, I said, my voice softening just enough to be terrifying. Do you remember that bag you are holding in the Paris photo? The orange Hermes Birkin? I clicked the remote. The photo zoomed in on the bag. That bag cost $12,000, I said. That is exactly what I earned in an entire year of scrubbing espresso grounds out of my fingernails. You were carrying my annual salary on your arm, and you didn't even know it. The crowd began to murmur. It started as a low buzz and grew into a hiss. They were looking at Beatrice not with admiration, but with the specific kind of disgust reserved for those who violate the unspoken rules of fair play. They could forgive being rich. They could not forgive stealing from a starving sibling to pretend to be rich. Beatrice stammered. Her face was the color of chalk. I thought Mom said it was family money, I finished for her. And she was right. It was my money, future money, credit money. She leveraged my identity to fund your lifestyle because she knew I would never see the bills. I didn't know, Beatrice cried out, her voice shrill and breaking. You checked in at the Four Seasons. Beatrice, I said cold. You ordered the room service. You wore the shoes. You posted the pictures. You capitalized on the fraud. Smash. The sound of breaking glass shattered the tension. Beatrice's champagne flute had slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor, exploding into 1,000 shards of crystal and splashing expensive vintage champagne onto the hem of her pale pink gown. She stared down at the mess, her eyes wide and vacant, as if the broken glass was a metaphor for her carefully curated life. And now, I said, turning back to the audience, for the pièce de résistance. I walked back to the laptop. You see, stealing from a daughter is a civil matter, I said. It is a family dispute. It is ugly, but it is private. But stealing from the United States government? That is a different conversation entirely. I hit the key. Slide 3. The Phantom Dependent. The screen went black for a second, then resolved into a stark, bureaucratic document. It was a standard IRS, Form 1040. The tax return for Rosalind and Arthur Alcott, dated 2020. I used the laser pointer function on the remote. A red dot danced across the screen and landed on the section for dependents. Box 4, I read aloud. Genevieve Marie Alcott, relationship, daughter, check box if permanently and totally disabled. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of people realizing they were witnessing a felony in real time. For 10 years, I said, looking directly at the lawyer's table. My mother has claimed me as a dependent, not just a dependent, but a disabled adult dependent. This classification allows for significant tax credits and deductions. It also allows her to shelter assets in a trust designed for my care, assets that she then withdrew for her own use. I brought up my own tax return on the other side of the screen. I am a senior forensic auditor, I said. I work 60 hours a week. I run marathons. I have never claimed disability. I have paid my taxes in full every year. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at Rosalind. She was gripping the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. You erased my autonomy to save 4% on your effective tax rate, I said. You told the government I was invalid so you could buy more jewelry. You didn't just steal my money, Mother. You stole my personhood. I turned back to the crowd. This is a violation of Title 26, United States Code, Section 7201, I stated, my voice ringing out like a judge's gavel. Tax evasion, fraudulent filing, conspiracy to defraud the United States. The penalty is up to $100,000 in fines and up to 5 years in federal prison, per count, for 10 years. Enough! Rosalind was on her feet. The mention of prison had snapped her out of her shock. She moved with the desperate, jagged energy of a cornered animal. She scrambled up the stairs, her emerald dress tangling around her legs. "Shut it off!" she screamed. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "You ungrateful little traitor! I will ruin you! I will sue you for everything you have!" She lunged for the laptop. She was going to smash it. She was going to try and physically destroy the evidence, as if breaking the screen would delete the truth from the cloud. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just watched her come, but she never reached me. From the front row, a cane lifted into the air. Hattie Alcott did not shout this time. She simply made a sharp, cutting motion with her hand. 2 men in black suits, men who had been standing quietly in the shadows near the emergency exits, moved with blur-like speed. These were not the rented event security. These were Hattie's private guard, the Praetorian Guard of the Alcott matriarch. They intercepted Rosalind 2 feet from the podium. One of them caught her wrist mid-swing. He didn't hurt her, but he stopped her momentum with the immovable force of a concrete wall. "Mrs. Alcott," the guard said, his voice low and devoid of emotion, "please step back." "Let go of me!" Rosalind shrieked, struggling against his grip. "She is lying. That computer is fake. Arrest her." "Let her speak." Hattie's voice boomed from the floor. She had stood up again, and this time, she turned to face the room, leaning heavily on her cane but looking 10 feet tall. "Let the girl speak," Hattie commanded. "If the numbers are wrong, Rosalind, you can prove it later, but right now, we are going to look at the ledger." Hattie looked at me. Her eyes were hard, but there was a glint of something else in them. Pride. "Continue. Genevieve," Hattie said. "Finish it." Rosalind went limp in the guard's grip. She realized, finally, that she had no power here. The guard released her, and she stumbled back, collapsing onto the floor of the stage, a heap of green velvet and ruined ambition. I adjusted my white jacket. I looked at the crowd. They were paralyzed. "Thank you, grandmother," I said calmly. I turned back to the laptop. The red dot of the laser pointer was still resting on the tax form, burning a hole through the lie. "We have covered the theft," I said. "We have covered the fraud. We have covered the taxes." I looked at Beatrice, who was still staring at the broken glass. "But there is one more slide," I said. "One more entry in the ledger that explains why all of this happened, why I was the scapegoat, why Beatrice was the golden child, and why my mother was willing to risk prison to keep the truth buried." I hovered my finger over the enter key. "You see," I said to the silent room, "Rosalind didn't just lie about the money. She lied about the blood." I pressed the key. Slide 4. The origin of the debt. The screen faded to black. The slide regarding the tax fraud was still burning into the retinas of the audience, but I did not give them time to process the felony. In a forensic audit, momentum is everything. You do not stop hitting until the structure collapses. I tapped the right arrow key on the laptop. We have discussed the cost of raising a failure, I said, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Now, let us discuss the cost of raising a success. Let us look at the price tag of the golden child. The screen shifted. The title card read, "The Academic Record of Beatrice Alcott." Below the title were 3 logos: Brown University, Sarah Lawrence College, the University of Pennsylvania. According to my mother's Christmas newsletters, I began, gesturing to the logos, Beatrice is a scholar, a triple major, a brilliant mind who hopped from prestigious institution to prestigious institution in search of the perfect program. I looked at Beatrice. She was standing in a puddle of champagne, clutching her elbows, shaking so hard her teeth were likely chattering. She knew what was coming. She had lived the lie, but she had never looked at the paperwork. "This is the reality," I said. I hit the spacebar. Under the Brown University logo, a document appeared. It was a letter from the Dean of Student Conduct, dated 7 years ago. "Dear Mrs. Alcott, regarding the expulsion of Beatrice Alcott for repeated academic dishonesty and plagiarism." "Expelled," I said. "Freshman year. Caught buying term papers from a doctoral student." I hit the key again. Under Sarah Lawrence. "Dismissed. Drug possession on campus grounds. Zero tolerance policy." I hit the key again. Under UPenn. "Administratively withdrawn due to failure to maintain minimum grade point average." The crowd was whispering now, a low buzzing sound like a hive of angry bees. They had all attended Beatrice's graduation parties. They had all brought gifts. They realized now they had celebrated a fiction. 3 colleges, I said. 3 expulsions, 0 degrees. I brought up a new document on the right side of the split screen. It was a series of checks drawn from the Alcott Company General Ledger. "But here's the interesting part," I said, pointing to the checks. "Every time Beatrice was kicked out, a donation was made. $50,000 to the Brown Library Fund, $75,000 to the Sarah Lawrence Landscaping Project, $100,000 to the Penn Alumni Association." I looked down at Rosalind, who was still on the floor, breathing hard, her eyes fixed on the screen with a look of pure hatred. "You bought her way in, and you bought her silence on the way out," I said. "You used shareholder money, company money, to bribe these institutions into sealing her records. You didn't pay for her education, Mother. You paid for her non-disclosure agreements." "She is smart," Rosalind screamed from the floor, her voice ragged. "She just has test anxiety. You are twisting everything." "I am not twisting anything," I said calmly. "I am just reading the bank statements." I paused. I needed the room to settle for the next part. This was the pivot point. This was the reveal that tied the entire evening together. "But bribery is just money," I said. "What I am about to show you is not about money. It is about a number, a specific number." I cleared the screen. In the center of the black void, I typed the figure, $499,000. "This is the amount my mother billed me," I said. "She called it the cost of my failure. It is a very specific sum. It is not rounded. It is precise." I looked at Arthur. He was standing near the stage, looking like a man who had just woken up in a burning house. "Dad," I said, "do you remember the Blue Heron incident?" Arthur blinked. "The investment property?" he stammered. "The one that flooded?" "That is what Rosalind told you," I said. "She told you that the family vacation home in the Hamptons needed emergency structural repairs due to water damage in 2021. She asked you to sign off on a withdrawal from the grandmother's charitable foundation to cover it, because the insurance was taking too long." Arthur nodded slowly. "Yes, I remember. It was about $500,000. It was exactly $499,000, I said. I hit the enter key. The screen exploded with images. These were not bank statements. These were photographs taken at night. They were grainy, illuminated by harsh flashlights and police strobes. The first photo showed a black Mercedes G-Wagon. It was not in a driveway. It was upside down in a ditch. The front end was crushed accordion style against an oak tree. The windshield was shattered. The second photo showed the interior, airbags deployed, blood on the dashboard, and in the center console, shattered but visible, a bottle of Grey Goose vodka. The room gasped. This was visceral. This was violence. September 12th, 2021, I stated. 2 a.m, Route 27. I pointed to the wreck. Beatrice was driving, I said. She was coming back from a party in Montauk. Her blood alcohol level was 0.18. That is more than double the legal limit. I brought up the police report. It was redacted in places. But the narrative was clear. Driver lost control. High speed. Property damage. Injuries reported. She hit a parked car before she hit the tree, I continued. She destroyed a family's minivan. She caused significant property damage to the estate she crashed on, and she broke her own collarbone. I turned to Beatrice. She was crying openly now, her hands covering her face, her body shaking with the racking sobs of a child who has been caught. Rosalind got the call at 2:15, I said. She didn't call you. Dad, she didn't call a lawyer. She called her fixer, and she drove to the scene. I clicked to the next slide. It was an insurance claim form. The header was from the Alcott family insurance policy. Claimant: Genevieve Alcott. Incident type: single vehicle collision. I was in Boston, I said, my voice trembling slightly with the suppressed rage I had carried for years. I was working as a junior auditor. I was asleep in my apartment, but according to this document, I was driving that car. I zoomed in on the signature line. Genevieve Alcott. She swapped us, I said to the room. Beatrice was drunk. Beatrice was going to go to jail. Beatrice was going to ruin the family image. So Rosalind made a choice. She arrived at the scene before the police. She moved Beatrice to the passenger seat, and when the officers arrived, she told them the driver had fled the scene in panic. I looked at the police report again. Suspect identified as Genevieve Alcott by vehicle owner, Rosalind Alcott. Suspect location unknown. You put an APB out on me, I said, looking down at Rosalind. You told the police I was the one driving. You told them I was the drunk one. You told them I ran away. I had to, Rosalind shrieked, scrambling to her knees. Beatrice couldn't handle prison. She is too fragile. You are tough. Genevieve, you could handle the record. I was going to pay the fine for you. You didn't pay a fine. Mother, I yelled back, my voice finally breaking the calm facade. You paid a bribe. I pointed to the figure on the screen. $499,000. That money didn't go to house repairs, I said. That money went to the property owners to not press charges. It went to the owner of the minivan to settle out of court. It went to the police benevolent fund to lose the blood evidence. And it went to a private medical facility to patch Beatrice up off the books. I walked to the edge of the stage. That bill you sent me? I said. That $499,000? That isn't the cost of raising me. That is the cost of keeping Beatrice out of prison. You embezzled from Grandma's charity to pay for Beatrice's crimes. And now that the auditors are sniffing around the foundation, you needed a hole to dump the debt into. So you sent the bill to me. I turned to the audience. I do not have a DUI, I declared. I have never been arrested. I have a clean record. The only criminal in this room is the woman wearing the emerald necklace. Arthur let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. He stumbled toward Beatrice. Is it true? He demanded, grabbing her by the shoulders. Beatrice, look at me. Is it true? Beatrice looked up. Her mascara was running down her face in black rivulets. She looked at Rosalind, desperate for a cue, for a line to read, but Rosalind was on the ground, defeated. I didn't mean to, Beatrice whispered. I was just having fun. Daddy, Mom said she would fix it. Mom said Genevieve wouldn't mind. Mom said Genevieve was used to being in trouble anyway. Arthur recoiled, as if he had been slapped. He let go of Beatrice and she stumbled back. He turned to Rosalind. You framed our daughter, Arthur whispered, The horror in his voice was absolute. You framed your own child. I did it for us, Rosalind screamed. She stood up, staggering, her hair wild, the mask of the socialite completely gone. She looked like a banshee. I did it for the family. Do you think this family survives on truth? It survives on image. Beatrice is the face of this family. She is the one people love. Genevieve is cold. She is hard. She is unlovable. Rosalind pointed a shaking finger at me. I sacrificed the one who didn't matter to save the one who did, she yelled. I did it to protect our honor, to protect the Alcott name from scandal. No, I said. I hit the button to kill the projector. The screen went black, plunging the room back into the dim golden light of the chandeliers. You didn't do it for honor, I said into the silence. Honor is telling the truth. You did it for leverage. I walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted for me, terrified. I walked until I was standing right in front of Rosalind. You hate me, I said quietly, because I am the only thing you cannot control. You love Beatrice because she is broken. You broke her on purpose. Mother, you kept her dependent. You kept her childish. You kept her addicted to your money so she would never leave you. I glanced at Hattie, who was watching with a grim satisfaction. You needed a puppet, I said to Rosalind. You needed someone who would smile and wave and sign whatever papers you put in front of her so you could drain the grandmother's accounts dry. You couldn't do that with me. I read the fine print. You are a monster, Rosalind whispered, tears streaming down her face. You are a cold-hearted monster. No, Mother, I said, leaning in close so only she and Arthur could hear. I am just the auditor, and the audit is closed. I stood up straight and turned to my father. She has been stealing from you too. Dad, I said. Check your retirement accounts on Monday. I have a feeling you will find a lot of transfers to the Cayman Islands. Arthur looked at Rosalind. His face hardened. The weak man who had hidden in his study for 30 years finally died, and something else took his place. Don't bother checking on Monday, Arthur said, his voice shaking with a new, terrible resolve. Because she won't have access to them by Monday, Rosalind gasped. Arthur, you wouldn't— I am done, Arthur said. He took off his wedding ring. It was a simple gold band. He looked at it for a second, then dropped it on the floor. It rolled across the marble and stopped at Rosalind's feet. I am done with the lies. I am done with you. Rosalind looked at the ring. Then she looked at the crowd. She saw the faces of her friends, her rivals, her social circle. There was no sympathy there. Only the cold calculation of people who were already mentally erasing her from their contact lists. She had lost, but I wasn't done yet. I had one more slide, one more secret that would turn this tragedy into a Greek myth. There is one last thing, I said, turning back to the stage. One last anomaly in the data that I could not explain until I hired a geneticist. The room went still again. You see, I said, Rosalind kept treating me like an outsider, like I didn't belong in this bloodline. I always wondered why she hated me so much, why she favored Beatrice so intensely. I plugged the USB drive back in. I thought it was because I was difficult, I said, but then I looked at the medical records. I hit the key. Slide 5. The paternity test. The final twist was about to land, and this one wasn't about money. It was about the very DNA of the Alcott name. Rosalind was on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage of her reputation. The wedding ring Arthur had discarded lay inches from her hand, a golden circle that marked the boundary between her past power and her future irrelevance. The room was silent, save for the soft, terrified weeping of Beatrice, who stood alone on the stage like a statue of grief. I watched Rosalind. I knew her pattern. I knew that narcissists do not accept defeat. They escalate. When you corner a rat, it does not surrender. It leaps for the jugular. Rosalind's eyes, red-rimmed and frantic, darted from the wedding ring to Arthur's turning back, and then they locked onto me. A transformation overtook her face. The fear evaporated, replaced by a malice so concentrated it felt like heat. She grabbed the edge of the podium and hauled herself up. She did not look like a socialite anymore. She looked feral. "You think you have won," Rosalind rasped, her voice wet and trembling. "You think you can come here with your spreadsheets and your little laptop and erase me? You think you are the hero of this story. Genevieve?" "I am not a hero. Mother," I said, my voice flat. "I am just the person balancing the books." "You have no right," Rosalind screamed. The sound tore through the ballroom, causing the crystal in the chandeliers to vibrate. "You have no right to audit this family. You have no right to stand on this stage. You have no right to the Alcott name." She pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. "Tell her, Arthur," she shrieked. "Tell her why I treated her differently. Tell her why she was never good enough." Arthur stopped walking. He turned slowly, his face a mask of confusion. "Rosalind, stop. It is over." "It is not over until I say it is over." Rosalind laughed. A jagged, hysterical sound. She turned to the crowd. Her arms spread wide. "You want the truth? You want the final secret? Here it is. Genevieve is not an Alcott." The air left the room. It was a physical sensation, as if 400 people had simultaneously inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Rosalind turned back to me, a triumphant sneer twisting her lips. "That is right. You heard me. You are not Arthur's daughter. You are a mistake. You are the result of a moment of weakness I had 29 years ago. I kept you. I fed you. I gave you my name to hide my shame. But you are nothing. You are a bastard child. And under the terms of the Alcott Trust, illegitimate heirs get nothing. Zero. You are not disinherited. Genevieve, you were never an heir to begin with." She spat the words out like poison. "You are my humiliation, and that is why I hate you." Arthur made a sound that was not quite human. It was the sound of a man being gutted. He collapsed onto the nearest chair, his face gray, his hands clutching his chest. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sudden, devastating realization. He believed her. At that moment, it made sense to him. The distance, the coldness, the lack of connection. He thought it was because we shared no blood. The crowd began to murmur. This was the kill shot. Financial fraud was one thing. Illegitimacy in a dynasty like the Alcotts was a nuclear bomb. Rosalind stood tall, breathing hard, believing she had played the ace that would strip me of my standing and nullify my attack. I looked at Arthur. I looked at the pain in his eyes. Then I looked at Rosalind. "I expected you to say that," I said. I spoke quietly, but the microphone on the podium picked it up. "I knew that when the money ran out, and the lies ran out, you would go for the blood," I said. "It is the only leverage you have left." I walked back to the laptop. "You see, Mother," I said, "in an audit, we call this a material assertion, and a material assertion requires independent verification." I placed my hand on the keyboard. "I didn't trust your word on the money," I said. "Why would I trust your word on my biology?" I hit the enter key. Slide 5. Paternity analysis. The screen blazed to life one final time. It was not a bank statement. It was a medical report from the Helix Genomics Institute, dated 3 weeks ago. The graph was simple. It showed 2 bars, blue and red. "I took a hair sample from Arthur's hairbrush when I visited for Christmas last year," I explained to the silent room. "I compared it against my own DNA, and just to be thorough, I compared it against Beatrice's." I pointed to the top graph. Subject A, Genevieve Alcott. Subject B, Arthur Alcott. Paternity probability, 99.9998%. "I am Arthur's daughter," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "I have his eyes, I have his chin, and biologically, I have his blood, every drop of it." Rosalind's face went slack. The triumph vanished, replaced by a horror so profound it looked like she was having a stroke. She staggered back, shaking her head. No, that's impossible. The science does not lie. Mother, I said, I am the Alcott. I always have been. Arthur looked at the screen. He sobbed. A great, heaving release of breath. He looked at me, and the love rushed back into his face, stronger and fiercer than before. He hadn't lost a daughter. He had found her again. But, I said, raising my hand to stop the room from reacting, that is not the interesting part of the report. I pressed the down arrow. The screen scrolled to the second graph. Subject C, Beatrice Alcott. Subject B, Arthur Alcott. The bar was flat. It was a red line that did not rise even a millimeter. Paternity probability, 0.00%. Result, exclusion. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of a worldview shattering. Beatrice, I said softly. Beatrice looked up at the screen. She blinked. She read the words. She read them again. What does that mean? She whispered, her voice sounding very small in the massive room. It means, I said, that Arthur is not your father. Arthur stood up. He walked toward the screen as if sleepwalking. He stared at the 0%. Rosalind? Arthur whispered. He turned to his wife. Rosalind. Who is she? Rosalind was shaking her head frantically. It is a lie. She forged it. Genevieve is lying. I ran the secondary markers. Mother, I cut her off. I ran Beatrice's DNA against the national database to find a paternal match. I found him. I hit the spacebar. A photo appeared on the screen next to Beatrice's results. It was a man. He had Beatrice's soft chin. He had her wide, anxious eyes. He had her exact nose. The room gasped. Everyone knew that face. Julian Vance, I said. The name rippled through the crowd. Julian Vance was a corporate raider, a bitter rival of the Alcott family who had gone bankrupt in the late 90s after a failed hostile takeover of this very company. He was a man Arthur despised, a man who had tried to destroy the Alcott legacy. You had an affair with Julian Vance 33 years ago, I said to Rosalind. While you were engaged to Arthur, you got pregnant, and you knew that if you told Arthur the baby was Vance's, the wedding would be off. You would lose the money. You would lose the estate. So you lied. I walked toward Rosalind. She was backed against the wall of the stage now, trapped. You passed off your lover's child as the Alcott heir, I said. And you let Arthur raise her. You let him pay for her. You let him love her, I pointed at myself. And then you had me, I said. 3 years later, a legitimate child, a real Alcott, I stopped inches from her face. And that is why you hate me, I whispered. Not because I am a failure, but because I look like her. I pointed to the front row, to Hattie. I have Hattie's nose, I said. I have Hattie's aptitude for numbers. I have the Alcott disposition. Every time you looked at me, you didn't see a daughter. You saw the mother-in-law you despised. You saw the bloodline you were trying to parasitize. You saw the truth staring back at you. Shut up, Rosalind screamed, covering her ears. Shut up! You're just like her, cold, heartless, calculating. Yes, I said. I am. And Beatrice? Beatrice was safe. Beatrice was Vance's daughter. She was weak like him. She was malleable. She was a blank slate you could paint your fantasy on. You loved her because she was yours, and you hated me because I belonged to the family you were robbing. Arthur let out a roar. It was a sound of pure, primal rage. He grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a pedestal and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, the sound like a gunshot. He turned to Beatrice. Beatrice was sobbing, looking from Arthur to the picture of Julian Vance on the screen. The resemblance was undeniable. She saw it. She saw the stranger in her own face. "Daddy?" she whispered, reaching out to Arthur. Arthur flinched. He looked at her with a mixture of heartbreak and revulsion. It wasn't her fault. She was an innocent victim in this biological fraud. But the lie was too big, too fresh. He couldn't look at her without seeing the betrayal. He couldn't look at her without seeing Julian Vance laughing at him. He stepped back. "Do not call me that," Arthur choked out. Beatrice collapsed. She fell to the floor in her ruined, champagne-soaked dress, wailing like a child who has been abandoned in a dark forest. Rosalind looked at her broken daughter, then at her enraged husband, and finally at the crowd of people who were looking at her as if she were a monster. "I did what I had to do," Rosalind yelled, trying one last time to control the narrative. Arthur was boring. He was weak. Julian had fire. I needed to survive. I gave this family a beautiful face. I gave you Beatrice. She is better than all of you. "She is a fraud," I said. "Just like you." I turned to the AV technician. "You can cut the feed now," I said. The screen went black. The light of the projector died. But the damage was permanent. The truth was out. The invoice had been itemized, verified, and presented. Arthur walked over to me. He looked broken. Aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He looked at my face, his face, and tears streamed down his cheeks. "Genevieve," he whispered. "My God. I treated you. I let her treat you." "I know. Dad," I said. I didn't hug him. Not yet. I was still in auditor mode. I was still holding the briefcase. "You were the victim of a long con. We both were. I thought," he stammered. "She always told me you were difficult, that you were other. I thought it was because we didn't connect. I didn't know." "She gaslit you for 3 decades, I said. "It happens to the best investors. You ignore the red flags because you want the deal to work." Hattie thumped her cane on the floor. "Arthur," Hattie commanded. "Come here." Arthur turned to his mother. He walked down the stairs and stood before her like a schoolboy. "I told you 30 years ago she was a snake," Hattie said, her voice carrying through the silent room. "I told you she was spending money we didn't have. I told you she didn't have the Alcott spine." "I am sorry, Mother." Arthur wept. "Sorry does not balance the ledger," Hattie said sternly. "Action balances the ledger." She pointed her cane at Rosalind, who was now crouching on the stage, murmuring to herself. "Get her out of my house," Hattie said. "And call the lawyers. I want the trust rewritten tonight." Hattie turned her gaze to me. For the first time in my life, I saw a smile on her face. It was small, sharp, and terrifying. It was the smile of a general who has just watched her lieutenant execute a perfect flanking maneuver. "Genevieve," Hattie said, "you missed a spot on your audit." "What is that? Grandmother?" I asked. "You forgot to bill her for the time," Hattie said. 32 years of wasting our time. That is the most expensive commodity of all." "I will add it to the final invoice," I said. I looked at Rosalind one last time. She was looking at Beatrice, but Beatrice was crawling away from her, revulsed by the mother who had used her as a human shield. The cost of raising a failure had indeed been high, but as it turned out, I wasn't the failure, I was the repo man, and I had just repossessed the entire dynasty. The silence in the ballroom was no longer empty. It was heavy, suffocating, the kind of atmospheric pressure that precedes a tornado. The DNA results on the screen had turned the air into lead. Rosalind was crouching on the stage, a broken queen in a ruined emerald dress, while Beatrice wept into the floorboards. Arthur stood between them, a man waking up from a 30-year coma to find his house in ashes. But the final gavel had not yet been struck. From the front row, a rhythmic thumping sound began. Thud, step, thud, step. Hattie Alcott was moving. My grandmother refused the help of her security guards. She gripped her ebony cane with a hand that looked like a map of veins and tendons, and she ascended the stairs of the stage. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. She was 90 years old, but in that moment, she looked ancient and terrifying, like a monolith that had weathered centuries of storms. She walked past me. She walked past Arthur. She stopped directly in front of Rosalind. Rosalind looked up. Her mascara was smeared, her face a mask of terror. She opened her mouth, perhaps to beg, perhaps to spin one last lie. Mother Alcott, crack. The sound was sharp, dry, and shockingly loud. Hattie had not used her cane. She had used her hand. She slapped Rosalind across the face. It was not a violent, brawling blow. It was a corrective strike. It was the kind of slap a teacher gives a student who has spat on the chalkboard. It was a dismissal. Rosalind recoiled, clutching her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. In the century-long history of the Alcott dynasty, no one had ever touched her without permission. Hattie did not yell. She did not need to. She turned to the crowd, her voice projecting with the clarity of a church bell. "There is a clause in the Alcott family charter," Hattie announced, addressing the room of stunned socialites and board members. Article 4, Section 2. Any member of the family who brings public disgrace, engages in criminal fraud, or compromises the integrity of the bloodline shall be excised, not punished, exercise, like a tumor. She pointed her cane at Rosalind. "You are not an Alcott," Hattie declared. "You never were. You were a bad investment I allowed my son to make because I thought you had potential. I was wrong. You are a liability, and as of this moment, I am liquidating your position." Hattie turned to the family lawyers, who were standing by the stage, pens poised over their notepads. "Write this down," Hattie commanded. "Effective immediately, Rosalind Alcott is removed from the trust. She is removed from the board. She is stripped of all titles, all allowances, and all access to family properties. She leaves this house tonight with nothing but the clothes on her back." Rosalind let out a strangled sob. "You can't do that. I have rights. I am Arthur's wife." "And Beatrice," Hattie continued, ignoring her, the cane sweeping over to where my sister lay curled in a ball. "Beatrice Vance is hereby removed from the line of succession. She is not of the blood. She is not an heir. She will receive a stipend for psychiatric care for 1 year, after which she is on her own. The Alcott name is not a costume you can wear to hide your mediocrity." Beatrice didn't even look up. She just cried harder. The sound of a child who realizes the nursery lights have been turned off forever. Then, Arthur moved, my father, who had spent his life shrinking into the wallpaper, who had let his wife dictate his tie color, his friendships, and his relationship with his own daughter. Stepped forward. He looked at Rosalind. The love in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, dull gray. "I want a divorce," Arthur said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, like commenting on the weather. "Arthur, please," Rosalind scrambled to her knees, reaching for his hand. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Think of the scandal. Think of the anniversary." Arthur stepped back, letting her hand grasp at empty air. "The scandal is not the divorce, Rosalind," Arthur said, his voice gaining strength. "The scandal is that I stayed with a kidnapper for 30 years. He turned away from her. He looked at me. He walked over to where I was standing by the laptop. I braced myself. I was ready for him to be angry that I had humiliated the family. I was ready for him to blame the messenger. Instead, he opened his arms. He pulled me into a hug that knocked the wind out of me. He buried his face in the shoulder of my white suit. He was shaking. My father, the CEO, the patriarch, was weeping like a lost boy. "I am so sorry. Genevieve," he choked out against my collar. "I am so sorry. I should have known. I should have protected you. I failed you." I stood there, stiff for a moment, the auditor in me still calculating the angles. But then, I felt the warmth of him. I felt the desperate, genuine remorse. I let my briefcase drop to the floor. I raised my arms and hugged him back. "It is okay, Dad," I whispered. "The audit is finished. We found the error." "I love you," he sobbed. "I love you so much. You are the only one. You are the only real thing in my life." "I know," I said, but even as I held him, my eyes were on the clock. I checked my watch over his shoulder. "Dad," I said softly, pulling away. You need to step back. What? He wiped his eyes, confused. You need to move away from Rosalind, I said. Right now. Why? I didn't have to answer. The answer came from the front of the house. Blue and red lights flashed against the high windows of the ballroom, cutting through the gold ambiance with harsh, strobe light violence. The sound of sirens, which had been a distant wail, suddenly grew deafening as vehicles roared up the gravel driveway. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open. It wasn't the caterers. 12 agents wearing windbreakers emblazoned with IRS, Criminal Investigation, and FBI marched into the room. They moved with the synchronized purpose of a raid team. Behind them were uniformed officers from the state police. The crowd screamed. Guests in tuxedos and gowns scrambled back, knocking over chairs and dropping champagne glasses. The illusion of the high society gala shattered instantly into the gritty reality of a crime scene. Rosalind stood up, her eyes bulging. What is this? Who called them? I stepped to the front of the stage. I did, I said. About an hour ago. I sent them the full dossier, tax evasion, the identity theft, the embezzlement from the charity, insurance fraud. I looked at the lead agent, a man I had worked with on a case in Chicago 2 years ago. He nodded at me. Rosalind Alcott, the agent boomed, walking up the stairs to the stage. You are under arrest for federal tax fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit identity theft, and grand larceny. No! Rosalind shrieked, backing away until she hit the projection screen. You cannot arrest me. Do you know who I am? I am Mrs. Arthur Alcott. This is a private party. Turn around and place your hands behind your back, the agent ordered. Unclipping the handcuffs from his belt, the metal caught the light. Steel, not silver. 2 officers moved toward Beatrice. Beatrice Vance? One of them asked. Beatrice looked up, her makeup running in black streaks. I didn't mean to. We have a warrant to bring you in for questioning regarding a hit-and-run incident on Route 27 and filing a false police report, the officer said. Please come with us. Beatrice stood up shakily. She didn't fight. She looked at Rosalind, who was currently being wrestled into cuffs by 2 federal agents. Mom? Beatrice whispered. Mom, fix it. But Rosalind couldn't fix it. Rosalind was screaming profanities, her face pressed against the stage floor as the agents secured her wrists. The clicking of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. It was the final entry in the ledger. Click, click, closed. I watched for a moment. I saw the flashbulbs of the press, who had miraculously appeared at the doors, likely tipped off by Hattie's people. I saw the shame on Rosalind's face as she was hauled to her feet, her emerald dress twisted, her hair in her eyes. I saw Arthur turning away, unable to watch the woman he had married be dragged off like a common criminal. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Hattie. Go, she said softly. You do not need to see the rest. The trash is being taken out. Are you sure? I asked. This is my house, Hattie said, leaning on her cane and surveying the chaos with a calm, ruthless satisfaction. I will handle the cleanup. You have done your job. Auditor, you are off the clock. I nodded. I picked up my briefcase. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The guests parted for me again. But this time, there was no judgment in their eyes. There was fear. Yes, but there was also awe. I was the woman who had walked into the lion's den and skinned the lion alive. I walked through the ballroom, past the frozen waiters, past the overturned chairs, past the shattering of the Alcott facade. I walked out the double doors and into the cool night air of the foyer. The reception desk was empty. The concierge had fled when the police arrived. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out the original hard copy of the invoice Rosalind had sent me, the one demanding $499,000. I took a red ink stamp from my pocket. It was a custom stamp I had ordered specifically for tonight. I placed the invoice on the mahogany desk. I pressed the stamp down with all my weight. Thunk! I lifted the stamp. The red letters bled into the paper. stark and permanent across the total amount. Paid in full, with your freedom. I left the invoice there, a receipt for the evening's transaction. I walked out the front door. The driveway was a chaotic sea of police cruisers and panicked valets, bringing around luxury cars for fleeing guests. I spotted my rental sedan. The valet saw me coming and practically ran to get the door open for me. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Have a good night, Miss Alcott," he stammered. "It is, actually," I said. "It is a very good night." I slid into the driver's seat. The leather was cold. I threw the briefcase onto the passenger seat. It felt lighter now. The burden was gone. I started the engine. I maneuvered the car around a police van that was loading a screaming Rosalind into the back. I caught a glimpse of her face through the barred window, twisted, angry, and utterly defeated. I felt nothing, no pity, no joy, just the cool satisfaction of a balanced equation. I drove down the long, winding driveway, the gravel crunching under my tires. The lights of the mansion faded in the rear-view mirror, shrinking until they were just twinkling stars in the distance. My phone buzzed on the dashboard. I glanced at it. A text message from Hattie. "Transaction complete. I have just authorized a transfer to your personal account. $10 million. Consider it a hazardous waste disposal fee. You earned every cent. Love, Grandma." I smiled. A real smile this time. Not the shark-like grin of the auditor, but the genuine smile of a woman who has just bought back her own life. $10 million. It was a lot of money. It was enough to start my own firm. Enough to buy a house that wasn't a glass box. Enough to never have to justify my existence to anyone ever again. I turned onto the highway, heading back toward the city. The skyline of New York glowed in the distance, a ribbon of gold and silver against the black sky. I rolled down the window. The wind rushed in, smelling of asphalt and ocean and infinite possibility. I turned up the radio. The song playing was loud, fast, and alive. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The car surged forward, eating up the miles. I was not Genevieve the failure. I was not Genevieve the victim. I was Genevieve Alcott, the one who survived. The audit was closed. The debt was settled. And for the first time in 29 years, my account balance was strictly, perfectly positive. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and family secrets. It was a wild ride, and I hope you enjoyed the audit as much as Genevieve did. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a busy city like Genevieve, or somewhere quiet in the countryside? Please leave a comment down below and let me know your location and what you thought of Rosalind's downfall. And if you want more stories like this, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Sunday Drama Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next story.